Jared, thanks for flying. Jared, ladies and gentlemen, flew from San Francisco to Chamonix to be here with us today. So thank you very much, Jared.
Pleasure to be here.
Jared, this session is about medical device, the future of medical device, and how these will shape, tomorrow's ecosystem and change the life of the patients, the HCPs, and the payers and the entire ecosystem. You are the head of the division diabetes, the diabetes division of Abbott, which is one of the 4 divisions of Abbott, alongside cardiovascular, neurology, and diagnostic. And you were, I've been told, and you told me, instrumental in the development of this new, very well-known medical device that is now equipping almost 4 million people globally, including a few 100,000 in France.
That's right.
Could you please share with us, what was at the inception of this breakthrough innovation?
Of course, Timothy, yeah. So first of all, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for the invite. I think the question that Professor Valenciennes posed about the future patient is a very important question, particularly for companies like ourselves who try to make products and services to help advance healthcare. So as you mentioned, one of the important examples that we have in our recent history is the FreeStyle Libre continuous monitor. I probably don't have to tell this audience about the burden of diabetes. Today, 500 million people in the world have diabetes. By 2045, that'll probably be over 750 million people. So an enormous burden on patients, their families, the healthcare providers, and frankly, society as a whole. So, that is an enormous burden. Abbott's been in diabetes technology for many years. But what we've seen was advances that weren't really making much impact on patient outcome and the situation on a macro level. And that's disappointing when you put an investment in. What we saw in reality is, the way patients manage diabetes, the core of that is understanding what their glucose levels are. Without that, you don't really know how to tailor therapy, behavior, etc. And as most of you probably know, the old way of doing that, even as little as 10 years ago, was to prick a finger and to put drops of blood on test strips and wait for results. And patients were encouraged to do that multiple times a day to give the information that they needed and their healthcare professionals needed to manage therapy. Now, unfortunately, that was painful, it was burdensome, it was hard to do. And when you recommended doing something like that 5, 6, 7 times a day, what we found was people weren't doing that. They just wouldn't do it. And even if they did do it, they didn't get data overnight, which is very important in diabetes, etc. So, I'm a scientist by background. I ran R&D for Abbott Diabetes Care, and we were always looking to say, is there a better way of doing this? And we looked hard at that. I'd like us to say that we thought we'd do a better way, and it happened that way. But as ever with innovation, it's never linear. There were many steps along that path. And the first versions of continuous glucose monitors that we did were not successful. They were not accepted by patients. They were not accepted by healthcare professionals or by people paying for those products. But the important thing is we learned the lessons of why they weren't being successful. So we felt we had very strong technology, but we hadn't turned that into a very strong product. And that's a real, very important difference when you're trying to bring health products to the market. And what we discovered during that time, the lessons we learned really, which we now build into everything we do, is innovation's meaningless unless it ensures access and affordability and can help many people. We passionately believe the best health tech is the one that reaches most people. And we think that's uniquely important with medical devices. And that's what we try to do with FreeStyle Libre. So all the work that we did, and we eventually brought that product, having learned all those painful lessons, to the market. And as you mentioned, we're glad to say today, it's been used by over 4 million people every single day across the world, by many hundreds of thousands of people here in France. And that was the fruition of all those stumbles and that learning and the understanding that these products, if they're to be impactful, really need to be affordable and accessible and help people in the real world, as they need it.
Thank you. Taking stock from this very successful story, where do you see the overall medtech industry going, and what are the major trends shaping innovation for tomorrow?
Yeah, as we look at the future and try to obviously anticipate what those trends are, as you say, an analysis of that is very important. So I would really point, I guess, to 3 things, many of which have been touched upon here today. The idea of better care and prevention, I think, is uniquely important as we think about bringing the next generation of medical devices to patients. The idea that we can help people avoid complications, avoid the long-term impact of chronic diseases with technology, I think is very important. And we've talked about prevention here today, and prevention is a big word. It can be used in many ways. I mean, for us, for instance, we think prevention of hospitalization could be very important. So in our structural heart unit, we have an implantable cardiac monitor that continuously monitors the performance of the heart and can be remotely read by physicians and cardiologists. And what we found is that ability for them to see what's going on without having to be with the patient and for them to be able to adjust therapy is avoiding unnecessary hospitalizations and all the complications that go with that. So as an example of preventing those sort of events with medical devices, I think that's a good one. Slightly different in our neuromodulation business. We have a Parkinson's implantable device that can now be controlled remotely by an app by the physician. And that allows them to adjust the implant stimulation to really affect, and improve the tremors, et cetera, that obviously are a problem with Parkinson's disease. So those are examples of ways that we work with bringing next generation medical products to the patients in order to prevent either unnecessary hospitalizations, unnecessary doctor's visits, et cetera. And in that way, we feel we're helping not only the patient, but the healthcare system itself.
Excellent. Thanks.
I think the second one I would point to really is, as we think about personalization of treatment for patients as well, I think that's another topic that we've heard a lot about today. The ability to bring these medical devices now to a patient and that link via digital world to physicians, we think is really making personalization of treatment and therapy and monitoring very real. We mentioned Freestyle Libre, which is obviously a biowearable that is very important in diabetes, but we're also using that technology to the future to measure other parameters, both in other medical areas and also, frankly, in health and wellness, because we see applications there in terms of allowing people to live healthier lives, get more information at their fingertips or at their back of their arm, wherever that may be, in order to give them the information to live, better lives on a personalized level. I think the other thing you get from that is you can get large amounts of data, and ironically, we find that personalizing medicine means, first of all, you have to understand the big picture, the big data set. And we're able to do that now with these connected devices. So I think that whole idea around personalization, the ability of moving to I guess what some people call a body area network, where you have sensors that are measuring important parameters all the time, and they're able to deliver that information in a seamless way to the wearer, or to the healthcare professionals in a disease state, we think is pretty important as a future trend as well. And I think finally, we'd have to touch on sustainability. We're obviously aware, as we bring these products to market, we're very conscious of our impact on the environment, et cetera. So, we have our own sustainability plan where we make commitments on reduction of carbon footprint, et cetera. But also importantly, we look at that from a product design perspective. So reducing power, reducing the size. So many aspects of trying to make sure that as we bring technology to the market, we're able to minimize the impact on the environment. For instance, our third generation of the Libre product uses 50% less plastic than the first two generations. And uniquely, actually, here in France, which is a pioneer in this space, we have a recycling program nationally that recycles all the medical devices that we use and are able to, obviously minimize the impact on the environment that way. So those are the three trends that we think that are shaping, in many ways, the future of medical devices.
So prevention, personalized medicine, this is music to my ears, as a physician, right? The sustainability piece, as a citizen, I can only subscribe, right? But what if now I'm a payer? If I'm, a critical part of the ecosystem, right, which is a payer.
Sure.
How do I make sure that I can afford all of this innovation? And what will it mean for me when I think about patient journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very important part of what we're trying to think about here. I mentioned earlier, the importance of affordability and access. And that's a critical part of, the position of medical devices in the healthcare system. But what I would say as well is the trend that we're seeing now, which is the confluence of tech, high tech, and medical devices is becoming very important in cost effectiveness. And that's across a number of different parameters. But for instance, telemonitoring, the ability to remotely monitor patients in diabetes or cardiac, cardiology, et cetera, takes cost out of the system in many ways. We saw it certainly during the pandemic that this ability to do this was accelerated, and we don't see it slowing down, frankly. So the ability to take the information, to digitalize it, allows you to democratize it and get it to everybody, not just a patient, but the doctors seamlessly, et cetera. And that really is a major breakthrough in terms of some of the costs that you can do. So for instance, today with diabetes, the patient's wearing a sensor that's giving them real-time information 24 hours a day. That is seamlessly going to the healthcare system through the cloud. And also importantly, it's also able to go to caregivers, so the family. I think we underestimate sometimes the role of the family in the treatment of chronic diseases as well. So all those things together are able to improve patient care, but also make the system more efficient in and of itself, avoiding unnecessary visits, being able to triage when patients really do need to come into the system or do not. So we see that as a very important aspect of the way the confluence of now medical devices and high tech is coming together. I think the other thing that then enables, frankly, coming back to your question of cost, the digitalization of that data allows the data to be collected very efficiently. And this, what we're seeing now, at least in the diabetes space, is a preponderance of real-world evidence now. So after a payer has paid for a product, the ability to take that data set collected painlessly, with no cost effectively, and then be able to look at how that data portrays the performance of the product in the patient's hands. So real-world evidence, we think, is becoming very important. Obviously, the classic randomized controlled trials are important. If I'm a payer, I'd want to see how that product's working in the macro level, at a population level. And that's what we can get now from the digital nature of these products and the connected devices. So we think that's very important. 4 million people using FreeStyle Libre every day. We collect a wealth of real-world evidence that we can now use to go back to payers and show the impact of that product and how it's really working, not on a 200-patient trial, but on a 200,000 patient cohort. One thing that was just recently published, led by the team from Dr. Riveline in Paris and presented last week at the European Association of Study of Diabetes, is the RELIEF study. Now, in France, you've got a very strong national claims database, and what we were able to do is to link, through the investigators, Libre data with that database and do analysis. And what that analysis showed was, for instance, in patients on one shot of insulin a day, so basally treated insulin, there was a reduction in hospitalizations of 65%. 65% within that cohort after they went onto FreeStyle Libre. If I'm a payer, that's the sort of data I want to see. That's real hard outcomes that are not just beneficial for patients, clearly, but also for a healthcare system and taking cost out. So I think that convergence of medical devices with high tech and the digitalization and the distribution of that data is becoming key in understanding the impact and the cost of these products in the macro environment. The final thing I'd say is, in the end, that all leads to a quality benefit. There's a quality of life aspect to patients. Clearly, that's very important. Frankly, there's a quality of life aspect to physicians who are able to understand the patient, condition more acutely and decide whether there's an intervention required or not. And that results in better care, so more dedicated care for those more complicated cases, less need for that for those patients under control, et cetera. So I think this convergence of tech and medical devices is really starting to drive patient outcomes on a macro level, on a population level, but also enable higher quality of care within the system as well at more efficient costs.
Jared, thanks a lot. And I like very much your closing remark. At the end of the day, it's about the quality of care we provide to the patients. It's about making sure that we have something that is sustainable, both in terms of cost and environmental impact. And it's also about the way the system operates and the way the physician will be able, leveraging more data, artificial intelligence, leveraging that to focus on really what matters to them on day-to-day.
Totally agree.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you all.